"We can't afford to include your kids," my Aunt Diane announced during the family planning meeting, her voice carrying the particular authority of someone who'd appointed herself treasurer of family gatherings decades ago and never relinquished the position. "The vacation house is expensive, $15,000 for the week, and we've calculated per-person costs very carefully. Adding your 3 children would throw off everyone's budget. Maybe stay home this year." My children, Emma, Lucas, and Sophie, had been listening from the next room, and I watched their excitement die in real time as they processed their great-aunt's words. They weren't wanted, weren't worth including, weren't important enough to accommodate. I nodded quietly, gathered my kids, and left without argument, because I knew something my aunt didn't. The beach house they'd rented for their exclusive family vacation was mine, had been mine for 5 years, and in 2 months, when they pulled into that driveway expecting paradise, I'd be standing on the porch waiting. Let me tell you about the inheritance nobody knew I had. My grandmother Adelaide was the family's quiet center. She'd raised 6 children in a modest house in Pennsylvania, stretched a teacher's salary further than anyone thought possible, and somehow maintained peace among offspring who'd grown into adults with vastly different values and tax brackets. Aunt Diane was the eldest, a corporate attorney who'd married wealth and never let anyone forget it. Uncle Robert followed, then Uncle Thomas, then my mother Catherine, then Aunt Patricia, and finally Uncle William. 6 children, 14 grandchildren. A sprawling clan that gathered for holidays with the precision of military operations and the warmth of business negotiations. My mother was the family disappointment. She'd married a carpenter named Frank O'Brien, a good man who worked with his hands and never made more than $60,000 a year. They'd raised me in a small house, never took fancy vacations, and were quietly happy in ways that confused my wealthier relatives. Poor Catherine, Aunt Diane would sigh at gatherings. She could have done so much better. My mother would smile and say nothing. She'd learned long ago that arguing with Diane was pointless. When Mom died of cancer 3 years ago, Diane delivered the eulogy with the particular condescension of someone honoring a cautionary tale. "She lived simply," Diane announced. "And there's a certain dignity in that." Translation: she lived poorly, and we should feel sorry for her. I sat in the front row, holding my children, and said nothing. What nobody knew was that Grandma Adelaide had secrets. My grandmother had been the daughter of a Maine fisherman, a fact she rarely mentioned, a heritage she'd left behind when she moved south for college and married my grandfather. But she'd never stopped loving the coast, the salt air, the particular peace of watching waves from a quiet porch. When I was 12, Grandma took me to Maine for a week. Just the 2 of us, staying in a small rental cottage on Crescent Beach. We collected shells, ate lobster rolls, and watched sunsets that painted the sky in colors I'd never seen in Pennsylvania. "This is my favorite place in the world," she told me. "Someday, I want you to have somewhere like this. Somewhere that's just yours." I didn't understand what she meant then. I understood when her will was read. Grandma Adelaide died when I was 27. The official will divided her modest estate among her 6 children equally. The house, the savings, the furniture accumulated over 60 years of careful living. Everyone got what they expected. But there was a second will. A private document filed separately, handled by an attorney nobody knew, containing a single bequest. The beach house in Maine, purchased secretly in 1987, maintained through a trust that drew from investments nobody had tracked, went to me. Just me. Her favorite granddaughter, the only one who'd ever asked about her childhood on the coast, the only one who'd shared that magical week at Crescent Beach. The property was worth approximately $2.8 million. The trust that maintained it contained another $400,000. My grandmother had been quietly wealthy in a way that nobody, not her children, not her husband before he died, not a single member of the family, had ever suspected. The attorney explained, "She wanted you to have something that was yours. Something nobody could take or diminish. She asked that you keep it private until you were ready to share." I'd kept it private for 5 years. Through my own marriage to a high school teacher named Marcus, through the births of Emma, Lucas, and Sophie, through family gatherings where Aunt Diane reminded everyone of my modest circumstances. Nobody knew about the beach house. Nobody knew about the trust that had quietly grown to over $600,000. Nobody knew that poor Catherine's daughter was actually a millionaire. The family vacation tradition had started when I was a child. Every summer, the extended family would rent a large house somewhere scenic and spend a week together. The costs were divided equally. Except Diane controlled the accounting, and somehow the division always favored her interpretation of fairness. My parents had stopped attending when I was 15. We can't afford it, my mother explained, though I later understood the real reason. Diane's constant reminders of their financial inadequacy had become unbearable. When I married Marcus and had children of my own, I'd tried to reintegrate. I wanted my kids to know their cousins, to have the big family experiences I'd missed. Diane made it clear we were tolerated, not welcomed. "We'll need payment up front this year," she'd announce, looking directly at me. "Some families have been slow to contribute. The children's activities have a separate fee," she'd add. "We can't subsidize everyone." Every year, another small humiliation. Every year, I smiled and paid and pretended the comments didn't sting. Until the meeting where she excluded my children entirely. "We can't afford to include your kids." The words landed like stones. My children had been planning for months. Emma, 12, had researched the area's hiking trails. Lucas, 9, had been practicing swimming to show his cousins how much he'd improved. Sophie, 6, had drawn pictures of sandcastles she wanted to build with her aunts and uncles. They'd heard everything. "The vacation house is expensive," Diane continued, oblivious to the devastation she was causing. "Adding your 3 children would throw off everyone's budget. Maybe stay home this year." I looked at my cousins, Diane's children and their spouses, Robert's kids, Thomas's family. Nobody objected. Nobody suggested alternatives. Nobody seemed bothered that 3 children were being excluded from a family vacation. "Okay," I said quietly. "We'll stay home. I'm glad you understand." Diane smiled magnanimously. "It's just practical. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." As if excluding children from their family ever could be anything but personal. I gathered Emma, Lucas, and Sophie and left. They cried the whole drive home. "Why doesn't Aunt Diane want us?" Sophie asked through tears. "Sometimes adults make decisions that aren't about you at all," I said. "They're about the adults being small and scared and wrong." "Will we ever see the beach?" I smiled for the first time that day. "Actually, sweetheart, I have a surprise. But it has to stay secret for a while." The rental Diane had booked was my house. I discovered this accidentally, 3 days after the meeting. A notification from my property management company. Booking confirmed for Sandpiper Cottage, July 15th to 22nd. Party of 18. Total, $15,000. I checked the guest name. Diane Patterson. My aunt had rented my own house for the family vacation she'd excluded my children from. The irony was almost too perfect. I called my property manager. "The Sandpiper booking in July. I want to handle this one personally. Don't mention my ownership to the guests." "Is there a problem?" "Not at all. I just want to be there when they arrive." The 2 months before the vacation were delicious. I brought my children to the beach house in June. Their first visit, their introduction to the property that would someday be theirs. We spent a week exploring the coastline, finding the same shells Grandma had shown me 20 years earlier, eating lobster rolls at the same roadside stand. "This is ours?" Emma asked, standing on the porch watching the sunset. "It's ours. Grandma Adelaide left it to me, and someday I'll leave it to you 3. "Why didn't you tell everyone?" "Because Grandma wanted it to be private. Our secret. Our special place." I paused. But sometimes secrets need to come out. Like when family treats people badly. Like Aunt Diane did to us? Exactly like that. We spent the week preparing. Not cleaning, the property management company handled that, but personalizing. Our family photos on the walls. Our beach toys in the mudroom. Our names on the mailbox, the O'Brien family. When we left, everything was in place. The trap was set. July 15th arrived with perfect weather. I drove up from Pennsylvania the night before, getting settled in the master bedroom. The one Diane had undoubtedly reserved for herself when booking. My children were with me, practically vibrating with excitement about what was coming. At 3 p.m., a caravan of cars pulled into the driveway. I watched from the porch as 18 family members, Diane and her husband Richard, their 3 adult children with spouses, Robert's family, Thomas's family, emerged from vehicles packed with luggage and expectations. Diane was already directing traffic. "Richard, get the bags. Jennifer, help your brother with the coolers. This is going to be the best vacation." She stopped mid-sentence. I was standing on the porch, my children beside me, in front of the house she'd rented, the house she'd excluded us from. "Melissa." Her voice was confused. "What are you doing here?" "Welcoming you to my home." "Your what?" My home. Sandpiper Cottage. I've owned it for 5 years. I smiled. Grandma Adelaide left it to me. The family's reaction was everything I'd imagined. Diane's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as she processed the implications. She'd rented a vacation house from her niece, the niece she'd excluded, the niece she'd called too poor to include, the niece she'd treated as a financial burden for decades. That's not possible, she managed. Adelaide didn't own any beach property. She did. Since 1987. She kept it private because she knew how the family would react. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why would I? So you could judge it, criticize it, try to claim rights to it. I shook my head. Grandma wanted me to have something that was mine, untouched by family politics. My cousin Jennifer, Diane's eldest daughter, looked uncomfortable. So we're staying at your house? The house you own. You paid $15,000 to rent my house, yes. For a vacation you excluded my children from because we couldn't afford to participate. The silence was devastating. Diane attempted recovery. Well, this is wonderful news, she announced, her voice too bright. Family property. We should discuss how to share it going forward, summer schedules, maintenance costs, fair access for everyone. No. The single word stopped her cold. This isn't family property. It's mine. Left to me specifically, privately, because Grandma knew exactly what would happen if she left it to everyone. I stepped off the porch. You can stay. You paid for the week, and I'll honor that reservation. But this isn't a family asset to be divided or scheduled or controlled. Melissa, be reasonable. I've been reasonable for 30 years. Reasonable when you called my mother a disappointment. Reasonable when you reminded us of our finances at every gathering. Reasonable when you excluded my children from a family vacation because we couldn't afford to be included. I looked at the assembled family. My children cried for weeks. They thought their family didn't want them. That's not. We were just being practical. You were being cruel. The same way you've always been cruel to anyone who doesn't meet your standards. I turned to my children, standing proudly on the porch of their inheritance. Emma, Lucas, Sophie, come meet your cousins. The ones Aunt Diane said we couldn't afford. The week that followed was uncomfortable in the best way. My family stayed in the master bedroom, our bedroom in our house. Diane was relegated to a smaller room down the hall. The power dynamic that had defined family gatherings for decades was suddenly, completely reversed. My children played with cousins who'd never been encouraged to know them. They built sandcastles on the private beach, hiked the trails Emma had researched, swam in the ocean Lucas had trained for. They belonged fully and completely, because we weren't guests in someone else's world anymore. By midweek, several family members approached me privately. I'm sorry, my cousin Michael said. I should have spoken up when Mom excluded your kids. It wasn't right. I never realized how she treated you, Jennifer admitted. I just never thought about it. Grandma always talked about you differently, Robert's son Daniel told me. Like you were special. I think I understand why now. I accepted the apologies. Some of them were genuine. Others were motivated by the sudden revelation of my wealth. People recalculating relationships based on new information about assets and inheritance. I noted who was which. The genuine ones would remain in my life. The others would fade away naturally. Diane never apologized. She spent the week maintaining her facade, pretending the revelation hadn't changed anything, acting as if she'd always known about the beach house and simply hadn't mentioned it. On the last day, as families packed their cars, she approached me with a proposal. We should formalize summer access, she said. Create a schedule for all the families. It's only fair. Nothing about this is fair, Diane. Grandma left this house to me because she knew you'd try to control it. She saw exactly who you are. I'm trying to bring the family together. You're trying to take what isn't yours. Like you've always done. I watched my children carrying beach toys to our car. Not leaving, just moving to the garage. We're staying for another week. You're welcome to visit anytime. But you'll have to ask. Ask my own niece for permission. Yes. The niece you excluded. The niece you called too poor to include. The niece whose children cried because their great-aunt said they weren't worth accommodating. I smiled. How does it feel, Aunt Diane? Being on the other side of someone else's decision. She had no answer. The beach house has become our family's center. Not the extended family. They're welcome when they behave respectfully, but that's proven to be a high bar. My family, Marcus, Emma, Lucas, Sophie, and eventually the friends and chosen relatives who treat each other with kindness. My children understand now that wealth isn't about showing off or controlling others. It's about creating spaces where love can grow without being measured against someone else's standards. Grandma Adelaide gave me that gift. A place that's ours, untouched by competition or cruelty. Every summer, when we arrive at Sandpiper Cottage, I think about the 12-year-old girl who collected shells with her grandmother, who learned that the Maine coast was sacred, who was loved specifically, intentionally, permanently. My children collect shells now. They're learning the same lessons. Some legacies skip generations. Some secrets protect what matters until the right moment. Grandma knew exactly what she was doing. And so finally do I.